Hi, this is Doug Dubach. Welcome to the Motocross Vault.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazier, and this video is going to look back at the 125 class of 2001. This is a really significant year in the history of motocross because this is the first year the Yamaha brought the 250F out, kind of up into the apple cart of the 125 class. I remember when I first saw that they were doing that, I don't think most of us took it too seriously. I certainly had ridden many 254 strokes, had an XR back in the day. And at the time, four-strokes weren't really taken that seriously. The 400F was very impressive, but it seems like most of the small-bore four-strokes had a hard time really making competitive power. I don't think anybody who hadn't ridden the YZ250F had any idea just what a significant advantage it would be. And it's clearly not the AMA. I do think if they had had a chance to see exactly how significant that change would be, if they might have maybe amended those rules to make it a 175 or 200 or something a little more fair. But as it was, that was the rules. Yamaha took advantage of it and really changed things. But in 2001 here, the YZ was the only 250 in the class. All the other 125s were still very competitive. It wasn't like you could get on a 125 and you couldn't win. But it's clear once you rode it, it was a significant advantage. A guy like James Stewart could still, outrun the 250Fs on the track. But I think it made, less talented riders better and certainly gave them an advantage. Here in the shootouts in 2001, not all the magazines even included the YZ250F. It was still kind of unsure whether it belonged in the 125 class and the shootouts and stuff, so not all the magazines included it. I am including it here in the rundown because, like I said, some of the magazines did, some didn't. So to give you an idea kind of how it fared at the time, but history would prove, obviously, the 250F was probably a bad choice, certainly an unfair advantage in the minds of myself and many others. Now, if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos on my channel. I have shootout rundowns of other classes, 125, 250, 500s, individual tests, all kinds of different stuff, even rundowns of some old magazines and stuff. Now, if you like to support what I do, I have a Motocross Vault merch available on my Teespring store. I have designs I've done for all the different manufacturers, off-road, ATV, and motocross. I'd love your support, and if you could share this on social media with your friends, I'd really appreciate it as well. So here, without further ado, is a look back at how the 2001 125 class stacked up in the 125 shootouts of the day. The 2001 season stands as one of the most momentous in the history of modern motocross. That year, Yamaha upended the power structure of the 125 class by introducing the very first YZ250F four-stroke. Yamaha's Super Thumper took advantage of the AMA's questionable displacement rules to deliver a 1-2 punch to the titular division. While the original YZF's peak power figures were not out of line with the top 125s of the time, its ultra-wide power band and excellent bottom-end torque certainly were. It was faster out of corners, easier to ride, and smooth as glass. With the arrival of the YZ250F, every two-stroke in the class was put at a significant disadvantage. While the new YZ250F was certainly a game-changer, it remained an outlier in a class full of screaming 125s. In 2001, it was the sole 250F four-stroke on the market, and only Motocross Action included it in their 125 shootout. At the time, many people still considered the four-stroke Yamaha a bike without a class, and it was not clear how the Yamaha Thumper would fit into racing moving forward. With that in mind, Dirt Bike, Dirt Rider, and Cycle News all excluded the YZ250F from their 125 shootout in 2001. While it was impossible to know exactly how the 250F would have fared in those contests, it's a fair bet that the four-stroke would have been very hard to beat. For those unwilling to take the four-stroke plunge in 2001, there were still a great selection of very competitive 125 machines available. Honda, Kawasaki, Yamaha, and Suzuki all offered updated racers, with Suzuki featuring the most changes for 2001. Over in Europe, Austria's KTM, Italy's TM, and Italy's Swedish import Husqvarna provided their riders with a taste of the exotic as an alternative to the ubiquitous Japanese. In the right hands, any of them could win, but three of the machines in 2001 made that task much easier. First out on our shootout standings is the 2001 Yamaha YZ250F. Motocross Action ranked it first out of the 6 machines they tested. Dirt Bike, Dirt Rider, Transworld, and Cycle News did not test the YZ250F against the other 125s. Before the introduction of Yamaha's 250F, the thought of a truly competitive 250 four-stroke seemed like a valve and cam lover's pipe dream. No one outside of Yamaha's testing department took it very seriously, least of all the AMA. In a world full of modified XRs, DRs, and KLXs, the 250 four-stroke's displacement limit seemed perfectly reasonable in the 125 class. Even when fully modified, one of these 254-stroke play bikes had a very difficult time keeping a good running 125 in their sights. With the introduction of the YZ250F, however, that double displacement advantage seemed more like a lack of foresight than any real attempt at parity. The Yamaha's road race-inspired 5-valve, 249cc power plant delivered far more power and torque than any of the production 250F 4-strokes ever had. It was 15 to 17 pounds heavier than its 125 competition, but that felt like much less of a penalty on the 250F than it did on the sometimes unwieldy YZ400 and 426F. Racing 125s were light, fun, and fast, but none of them possessed the 250F's unbeatable combination of low-end grunt and limitless rev. One ride on the 250F was usually enough to convince most riders that it had no business racing in the 125 class. Fairness debates aside, there was no denying the fact that Yamaha's revolutionary YZ250F was one phenomenal racing motorcycle. Its motor was smooth, powerful, and incredibly flexible. Its suspension was well sorted, and its chassis was remarkably precise. Riders loved the YZ's comfortable ergonomics, razor-sharp handling, and rock-solid stability. The motor was bulletproof, and the whole bike was built with Yamaha's typical attention to detail. Its only real downsides were its sometimes problematic starting and a sinking feeling that you were getting away with something by racing it against true 125s. As long as you did not stall it, it was as close to cheating as any self-respecting racer could get. Many riders still preferred the sound, smell, and feathery feel of the screaming 125s, but the results on the track would quickly prove the YZ250F broke the 125 class paradigm in a way the original YZ400F had not. Next up on our rundown is the 2001 Suzuki RM125. In our shootout rankings, Motocross Action ranked it 3rd out of 6, Dirt Bike ranked it 1st out of 6, Dirt Rider ranked it 1st out of 6, Transworld Motocross ranked it 1st out of 5, and Cycle News ranked it 2nd out of the 6 bikes they tested. In 2001, Suzuki's RM125 was coming off a 125 National Motocross Championship with Travis Pastrana at the controls. The wonderkind of motocross made the 5-year-old RM look like a world beater, but its performance in stock condition was less unanimously praised. Experts loved its stratospheric revs, but those of lesser talent struggled with its demanding power band, nervous handling, and cramped feel. In a world dominated by the chunky power bands of Yamaha and KTM, the RM's old-school screamer personality seemed like a throwback to a 125 era whose time had passed. In 2001, Suzuki scrapped everything about the old RM125 platform and dialed up an entirely new design. The new bike featured an innovative semi-perimeter frame, redesigned motor, revamped suspension, and flashy new champion yellow bodywork. The new layout was super slim and very comfortable, with lots of room to climb all over the bike. Styling was drop-dead gorgeous, with a modern look that made the old machine look like the throwback to the 90s that it was. The new bike was lighter, faster, and much better suspended, with a solid power band and the best turning in the class. The new motor offered better torque than in 2000, but it was still no match for the Yamaha and KTM in the middle part of its rev band. As before, its best work was done on top, where the RM pulled and pulled until your right wrist ran out of throttle to twist. Riders loved the RM's light feel, excellent ergonomics and plush suspension, silky smooth clutch, effortless jumping, and strong power band. For Dirt Bike, Dirt Rider, and Transworld MX, this was enough to propel the screaming yellow zonker to the top of the 125 division. For Motocross Action and Cycle News, the RM's nervous high-speed handling and less chunky mid-range placed it behind its brawnier blue rival. Next up on our rankings is the 2001 Yamaha YZ125. Motocross Action this year placed it 2nd out of 6, Dirt Bike ranked it 2nd out of 6, Dirt Rider put it 2nd out of 6 tested, Transworld also ranked it 2nd out of 6, and Cycle News picked it 1st out of the 6 machines it tested. Long the whipping boy of the 125 class, Yamaha's YZ125 made a major leap to the front of the class in 1996. The all-new machine offered a broad and torquey power band that made going fast easy. Over the next 5 years, Yamaha rode its power advantage to a string of impressive victories on the track and in the press. The YZ's remarkable motor and excellent do-it-all chassis made it the 125 to beat at the tail end of the last century. In 2001, Yamaha decided to chase a bit more top end in their 125 powerhouse by reconfiguring the porting, moving to a 6-pedal carbon fiber reed valve, and upping the size of the carburetor by 2 mm. The new 38mm TMX was the same size mixer found in the YZ250, and Yamaha hoped it would give the YZ the firepower to outgun KTM's new horsepower champ, the 125 SX. The result of all these changes was a YZ that delivered a stronger and longer pull on top, but less punch down low. The bike was by no means as difficult to ride as some of its competitors, but it was more challenging than in the past. It was no longer just enough to grab a handful of throttle to get the YZ going out of turns. The new power plant required a healthy stab of clutch and more careful gear selection than in the past. The less forgiving power band was no issue for experts who enjoyed the added boost on top, but for those of lesser talent, the new power profile could be frustrating at times. While the new motor proved polarizing, the rest of the YZ was all aces in 2001. The suspension was excellent with a plush feel and good control. The brakes stopped on a dime, and the front end went exactly where it was pointed. It was not quite as sharp in the turns as the scalpel-like RM, but it was far more predictable at speed than the yellow machine. Overall, it was an excellent bike that was just a bit harder to ride than in the past. For cycle news and motocross action, that was enough to land the YZ at the top of the True 125 standings in 2001. For dirt bike, dirt rider, and trans world, the YZ's more demanding personality was enough to slot it behind the all-new RM in the final standings. Next up, we have KTM's 2001 125SX. In the motocross shootouts, motocross action picked it 4th out of the 6 they tested, dirt bike ranked it 3rd out of 6, dirt rider ranked it 4th out of 6, trans world picked it 5 out of 5, and cycle news ranked it 3rd out of the 6 machines they tested. In 2000, KTM had been a legitimate contender for the best 125 in the land. The PDS no-link rear suspension was mediocre, and its chassis was unrefined, but its 124.8cc case reed mill was so fast that many riders were willing to overlook its many other shortcomings. For riders who prioritized power overall, the KTM offered a very competitive 125 package. For 2001, KTM dialed up an all-new motor, revamped their suspension package, and redesigned the pilot's compartment in a bid to finally topple the Big Four stranglehold on the 125 division. The new motor maintained the case reconfiguration, but rejiggered the bore and stroke to match the European works machines of Jamie Dobb and Grant Langston. The new motor featured a lighter crank, new porting, and a redesigned piston. Chassis changes were limited to a revamped setting for the 43mm white power forks and a new PDS shock, while all new bodywork cleaned up the looks of the machine and slimmed down the ergos. Thankfully for KTM fans, the motor change for 2001 did nothing to diminish the Katume's reputation for horsepower. Unlike some manufacturers, who chose to chase the YZ's wide power band, the engineers at KTM took the opposite approach by focusing on what they did best. For KTM, that meant a mid and up power curve that came on strong in the mid-range and pulled hard all the way to redline. There was not a lot of grunt down low, but if you feathered its excellent hydraulic clutch, the KTM snapped to life and flat ripped. On the dyno, it pumped out 2 more peak horsepower than the YZ125 and a full 3 ponies more than the highly regarded RM. It even outpowered the all-new YZ250F on the dyno. Torque, of course, was another matter, but in the peak pony race, the KTM was the king in 2001. On the track, that horsepower advantage was immediately apparent, and everyone who rode the Austrian machine commented on its remarkable power band. The orange machine rocketed out of corners and howled up steep hills. The hydraulic clutch meant no adjustment in the heat of battle, and the transmission, while not silky smooth, was improved and more than capable of catching the next cog when necessary. Add in the easiest airbox access, and you have what most people considered to be by far the best 125 motor package available in 2001. As to the rest of the KTM's performance, it was not as unanimously loved as the motor. The WP forks and PDS shock continued to rank last among its competitors. The shock felt both stiff and was still prone to bottoming. The fork transmitted way too much of the track through the Trick Mangura fat bars and were generally far busier feeling than most riders liked. The KTM was super light and felt that way on the track, but its overall handling was disappointing in most respects. The front end felt disconnected to the rest of the chassis, and it was hard to trust it in low traction situations. Stability was also not a standout, with the KTM being prone to unpredictable fits of headshake from time to time. These issues were less of a problem than they would have been on a heavier and more powerful machine, but they did detract from the 125 KTM's overall appeal in 2001. On the plus side was the KTM's new bodywork, which was slimmer and more handsome than before. Riders liked the new riding position, but continued to complain about the concrete KTM was trying to pass off as seat foam. The Mangura oversized bars were super trick, the hydraulic clutch was Sano, the plated pipe was durable, and the Brembo brakes stopped the orange missile with authority. The rims, sprockets, and chain were also a cut above what you typically found on a Japanese machine at the time. With all of this going for it, the best KTM could manage was a 3rd overall in any of the final standings, however. Even riders that gave the KTM a perfect 10 for its motor performance could not find a way to overlook its many other problems. Motocross Action Dirt Bike and Cycle News ranked it as the third best 125 available in 2001, but even those magazines who slotted it lower conceded that the excellent motor was hard to overlook. Unfortunately, however, even in a class where the motor is everything, you need a little more help from the chassis to harness all of those wild ponies. Next on our rankings, we have the 2001 Honda CR125R. In the Motocross Shootouts this year, Motocross Action picked it 5th out of 6, Dirt Bike ranked it 5th out of 6, Dirt Rider picked it 3rd out of 6, Transworld picked it 4th out of the 5 they tested, and Cycle News ranked it 4th out of the 6 machines they had in their shootout that year. Once the purveyors of the fastest 125s in the land, Honda and their iconic CR125 fell on hard times in the late 90s. Starting with the switch to an aluminum frame in 98, the once fire-breathing alpha male of the class was turned into an asthmatic 207-pound weakling. Add in a chassis that buzzed, bucked, and beat you to death, and harsh suspension, and you had a recipe for one of the most precipitous falls from grace in modern motocross history. Knowing they had made a major misstep in 1998 with the first-generation alloy frame, Honda set about fixing the little Honda's many failings in 2000. The second-generation alloy frame was more compact, less rigid, and designed to bring back some of the legendary turning prowess that had been neutered by the new alloy chassis. An all-new motor finally retired the Honda PowerPort design in use since 1990 and went with a road race-inspired flapper valve design cribbed from the NSR Grand Prix machine. The all-new bodywork, revamped suspension, and a slight color change finished off the reimagined CR125 for 2000. On the track, the new CR turned out to be a huge improvement in every way but one. The new chassis handled great, and the suspension provided some of the best performance in the class. The redesigned frame was less harsh, and everyone praised the CR's comfortable feel. About the only thing that turned out to be a disappointment was the motor, which continued to pale in comparison to its rivals. The new motor hit hard in the middle, but offered very little at the extremes. Its mid-range punch was fun, but it was very hard to keep the Honda in its narrow sweet spot on the track. Shift too soon, and it bogged. Shifted too late, and it stopped pulling like the spark plug wire had fell off. If you could keep it pinned and row the gearbox like a man possessed, then the Honda was competitive, but there were far easier ways to go fast in 2000. For 2001, Honda looked to up the competitiveness of their 125 by increasing the size of the air intakes on the airbox by 20%, enlarging the intake track, redesigning the reed valve, reconfiguring the porting, lengthening the stroke of the power valve governor, reshaping the flapper valve, bolting on a new exhaust pipe, and adding 8% of additional mass to the flywheel. On the chassis front, the alloy frame was adjusted to offer a half-degree slacker head angle, and the suspension was updated with all-new valving, a stiffer set of springs up front, and an inch shorter shock in the rear. Thankfully for the Honda faithful, these changes added up to a much improved 125 machine. The motor changes for 2001 broadened the CR's pull with a longer power band that no longer fell off a cliff past the mid-range. The top-end pull was no threat to a KTM, or a 1997 CR125 for that matter, but there was enough there to get the job done if you needed to leave it on just a little bit longer. Low-end power remained non-existent, with the CR requiring lots of clutch and more skill out of turns than most of its rivals. Lowering the gearing helped, but the Honda was never going to be as easy to ride as the YZ or RM. As in the past, the shift action and clutch on the Honda were flawless, but the continued use of a 5-speed transmission puzzled many testers. The updated suspension and chassis were roundly praised, and many felt the Honda was the most comfortable bike in the class, with its excellent ergonomics, quality components, and comfy seat. There was still a bit too much vibration coming through the alloy frame, but everything you touched, turned, or twisted felt like it was built to last. In the end, the Honda's placing came down to one factor: power. Everything about the red machine except its motor was at or near the top of the class, but that one factor was just too much of a handicap in the eyes of most of the magazine testers. If it had a bit more bottom end and a stronger pull on top, it would have been the best 125 in the land by a wide margin. But as it was, the Honda was a super fun and super well built bike that was not quite up to bringing back the glory of the big red machine to the 125 class. Our next machine is the 2001 Kawasaki KX125. In the 2001 standings, Motocross Action ranked it 6th out of 6, Dirt Bike ranked it 4th out of 6, Dirt Rider ranked it 5 out of 6, Transworld ranked it 3rd out of the 5 they tested, and Cycle News ranked it 5 out of 6. Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, Kawasaki's KX125 was one of the winningest machines in motocross. Multiple AMA National and Supercross titles attested to the potential offered by Kawasaki's little green machine, but that professional success rarely translated to victories in the enthusiast press. With Mitch Payton's motor wizardry and Ricky Carmichael's riding skill, the KX was a winner, but in stock condition, it was often a very flawed package. In 2000, the KX125 offered a short and punchy power band that was very similar to the one found on the CR125. When it was on the pipe, the green machine was fast, but that burst was very short in duration. The hard-hitting power band was fun to ride, but difficult to use in the heat of battle. Its larger overall size, lackluster turning, and mushy brakes also hindered its appeal to many. The KX offered potential, but you needed a skilled tuner to sand off its rough edges. For 2001, Kawasaki dialed up several engine changes aimed at broadening the KX's narrow power band. The new cases increased primary compression and repositioned the carburetor to be closer to the crank. An all-new cylinder featured updated porting, a better sealing Kips valve, and slightly more compression. The flywheel was lightened, and a new ignition curve was installed to work with the revamped motor settings. The PowerJet carburetor for 2000 was retired in favor of a conventional 36mm McCuney mixer, and the silencer was shortened by 2 inches. On the chassis front, the 2001 KX was largely a carryover, with the only significant change being a new linkage, straight-rate shock spring, stiffer fork springs, and an assortment of upgrades to the front and rear calipers. The frame, bodywork, and even the graphics remained largely unchanged from the year before. In the end, the engine changes made for 2001 did improve the KX's power band slightly, but it remained narrower than most of its rivals. The new motor picked up a bit sooner off the bottom and pulled a tiny bit farther on top, but most of its power remained dead center in the power curve. Gearing it down helped slightly, but it was never going to snap out of turns like the orange, blue, or yellow machines. The updated suspension worked better than in 2000, but some riders noted that the chassis felt unbalanced, with the forks feeling stiffer than the shock. The KX's big bike feel and slow handling also felt out of step in a class dominated by quick twitch carvers. If you were tall, quick on the shifter, and hated head shake, then the KX had a lot to offer, but that narrow demographic limited its appeal in the final shootout standings. A few of the magazines rated it above the similarly horsepower-impaired Honda, but none of them were willing to place the KX above the more potent RM and YZ. Next up, we have a little Italian flavor with the 2001 Husqvarna CR125. In the shootout rankings, Motocross Action did not test the Husqvarna in 2001. Dirt Bike ranked it 6th out of 6. Dirt Rider ranked it 6th out of 6. Transworld did not test it, and Cycle News also did not test the Husky. In 2001, Husqvarna was having a bit of a moment in the US. After 2 decades off the AMA circuit, the all-new Fast by Faraci team was set to bring the historic brand back to American motocross glory. With 2-time AMA 125 champion Steve Lamson and a team of young and up-and-coming riders under the Faraci tent, Husqvarna appeared ready to make a major splash in 2001. While the Husqvarna team had all but disappeared from our shores after the sale of the original Swedish company to Cagiva in the late 80s, it had continued to thrive overseas. The new Italian Husqvarna developed a strong presence in the GPs, with riders like Jackie Martins, Daryl King, Peter Johansson, and Alessio Chiodi piloting the machines to victory. Multiple world motocross titles pointed to the competitiveness of the machines, but they remained more of a curiosity than a viable racing machine to most American riders in the 1990s. With Husky's new push to get back in the US market, the machine started to get a bit more attention in the press, and at least 2 of the major magazines included the Husky in their shootouts for 2001. Both Dirt Bike and Dirt Rider included the Italian 125 in their rankings, but neither magazine saw it fit to place it above the offerings from Austria or Japan. While the Husqvarna finished last in both comparisons, it was not without its virtues. Riders praised its high-quality components, impressive build quality, roomy layout, easy-to-use power, and rock-solid stability. The suspension was also much improved for 2001, with the new Marzocchi forks and Sox rear shock performing better than the white power units found on the KTM. Where things got tough with Husqvarna was in its very European feel. While riding the Husky, it was clear that the bike was developed on a very different style of track than we ride over here, and that hurt it in the final standings. The machine's steering was very slow, and its suspension was quite uncomfortable with big hits and sudden transitions. The motor was easy to ride, but its shifting was notchy, and it lacked the burst needed to clear tricky doubles out of tight turns. It was more of a momentum motor that was far happier flowing around the fast Italian hillsides than going big out of a turn at A1. The machine was also the heaviest of the group, and it felt that way on the track. In its native environment, the Husky was probably a solid performer. But to the US-based testers in 2001, there was a bit too much spaghetti in its recipe for Western tastes. Last up in our 2001 125 retrospective is the 2001 TM125 Cross. This season, Motocross Action, Dirt Rider, Dirt Bike, and Transworld did not test the TM, but Cycle News did, and they ranked it 6th out of the 6 machines in their test. In 2001, only one magazine saw fit to include the TM in their 125 Shootout. Even more off the beaten path than the Husky, the other Italian was probably better known in the US for their rocket-fast kart motors and gaudy pink plastic than their motocross performance. Despite their minuscule share of the US market, however, TM was building some of the trickiest machines available in 2001. Their motors featured cooling jackets that extended into lower cases to cool the intake charge as it entered the crankcase. The clutch was hydraulic, the engine cases looked works, the steel perimeter frame was unique, and the high-dollar Swedish Öhlins shock was premium. Everything from the billet brake pedal to the Excel rims to the tough Technocell graphics was premium in quality. Like the Husqvarna, however, the TM setup was more Matterley Basin than Muddy Creek. Well known for making horsepower, the TM's motor was extremely powerful but tricky to control. There was nothing down low, then an extremely hard hit that rocketed the Italian stallion forward. This worked very well if you could keep your momentum up and row the gearbox, but trying to play stop and go in a tight track left most riders frustrated. The plush Öhlins shock worked like a dream, but the grim Italian Paoli forks performed more like a nightmare. Harsh, jolting, and ultra stiff, they made the KTM's white power forks look like a magic carpet by comparison. The TM's handling was more precise than the Husky, but it remained more of a high desert hauler than a tight turn specialist. There was a solid understeer to the front end, and the TM was far more comfortable railing the outside rather than trying to outduel the RM to the inside line. With its powerful motor, excellent shock, and comfortable layout, and solid high-speed handling, the TM125 Cross was a capable racer in the proper environment. It was faster than many of the other machines in the class, but its light switch power and cranky clutch made it difficult to master if the track was tight. The TM's awful forks were probably the bike's biggest downfall, and finding someone to sort them out had to be the first item on any TM intender's checklist. Once they were sorted, you were left with a wicked fast, super trick works bike for the masses. If you had the talent to make that work, then the Italian was your ticket to GP victories. But for most Americans, the TM was a bit too exotic to beat out the class's more mainstream alternatives. So there you have it. That's a look back at the 125 class of 2001 and how they stacked up in the magazine shootouts at the time. I loved researching these articles. They're fun to write when I'm writing for PulpMX and doing the video here. It's always, I love the shootouts. I love the magazines. Unfortunately, a lot of these magazines are not even around anymore. And you can certainly watch, shootouts on the video. I'm sure the younger people probably prefer watching it on YouTube. But there was just something so cool about waiting every month for that magazine to come out. You go to your mailbox and get that physical copy. And I still have them here. Videos sometimes on the internet go away, but if you have the physical copy, you can always read it. It's, it just... I'm old fart. I'm sure a lot of my old farts out there watching this can sympathize, but it was just a different time, and certainly a different time for the 125 class. I don't think, again, any of us at the time had a sense of just how much of a paradigm shift that 250F was going to be. It was kind of like, I don't know. I remember when I first heard it was coming out, I was like, how competitive is this machine going to be? I'd ridden plenty of 254 strokes, and none of them were that impressive. Certainly 125s were much more racy at the time, but that I ended up buying the 250F, and it was definitely a game changer. It was cool. I don't know that the first one was that much faster than a 125 at the time, but it was certainly much, much easier to ride. And on a track where a million things come into it to play, just getting the bike hooked up out of turns and stuff, it was much easier on the 250. It's hard to underestimate how significant that was. So anyways, time changes. You got to change with the times. There's so much for crying over spilled, two-stroke oil. So if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos I've done. I have retrospectives, as I said, on all kinds of different motocross and off-road machines. In the meantime, if you could share it on social media, tell your friends about the channel, I'd really appreciate it as well. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazier from the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.